Good afternoon. I know I have the privilege of being the last speaker today, so I'll try to keep this interesting. And I'd like to, thank the organizer for inviting myself and inviting AECOM to help and to participate in the conference and to share some of the interesting work that we're doing. And I think I'll take a bit of a different tack at the question in terms of fostering public and private partnership to share with you some of the work that we're working with on both the private side and then how our relationship is with the private sector side. And I'm going to approach this more as an urban designer, a city planner, and a master planner who's been involved in the transition and the transformation of many of the various cities in Asia. And I think this is something that a lot of Asian cities are definitely experiencing in terms of the real shift in population and this notion in terms of how population moves from both a rural area into a more urban area, but also within the urban context, what that means in terms of the way in which people interact from both an employment point of view, a residential point of view, as well as visitors. And I think this population shift is definitely something that a lot of the cities in Southeast Asia are struggling with in terms of the urban population and the growth within those various city centers. And I think you can see this across many of the cities in Southeast Asia, that build up and that transformation of that population. And what the interesting thing is with that population is it's a population that's being built up from the country itself. It's only in a few locations such as Singapore and a little bit in Kuala Lumpur where you're getting a foreign influx in terms of increase in this population, but a lot of it's actually being generated from within the existing centers themselves. And this has really transformed a lot of the city centers, especially here in Kuala Lumpur. A lot of the current issues that are starting to build up have to do with this densification and urbanization. Now, the question really is, what is that urban draw? Why are people drawn to these centers? A lot of it has to do with the competitive economies that are created within these centers, the access to resource and the ability to capitalize on those resources, the competitive nature of the tourists that do come to visit and the ability to service those tourist populations, and also the connectivity then to the global markets and being able to connect easily and quickly to global markets. Now, a lot of this comes down to investments as well. I think one thing is cities are known to produce the majority of GDP in the countries that they exist, and there will be the need for a lot of investment. I think Mackenzie's has put it at about $57 trillion in terms of investment dollars going into urban infrastructure as these cities continue to transform over time. Now the second part of that, so that deals really with population. I think the second part in terms of the impact on urban environments is really the climate change issue, which I think has been highlighted by several speakers today, but it really deals with the temperature and water rising, so areas that are changing in temperature, as well as issues that are then dealing with either sea level rise or intensity of storm. And here in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of trends. I won't go into this in very much detail, but there are trends in terms of increasing rainfall and increasing disturbance in storm events, that it's not being as predictable throughout the year. The other components that have to do with increased amount of heat, the intensity of these rainfalls, droughts, and typhoons. And you can see that on a daily basis in terms of, and I think it was mentioned in the disaster management talk earlier, in terms of what some of the response to this has been. And I think in Southeast Asia, these are definitely trends that are impacting a lot of those urban populations and those cities in terms of development and the impact of climate change and the ability to be able to manage the expansion of those cities that work with some of the changes. And so what this really brings to a head is an era of complexity, and a complexity that really is a challenge in terms of how people are coming up with solutions to these problems. And it really asks the fundamental question in terms of moving forward. How do we create these environments that use the physical and social elements to really create, enhance, and sustain all of these world's built natural and social environments? And how do you do it in a way that there are a lot of mobility challenges. There's issues in terms of homogeneity that starts to develop within communities. There's a lot of environmental pollution that happens, both both air and noise pollution in urban environments. Water systems become very stressed within this population growth. And then there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed, just in terms of basic infrastructure to support this increase in population movement. Overlying that is then the connections to social systems and social structures, which are incredibly important in terms of stability within these different urban environments. And cities really do need this infrastructure to generate the economic growth that they're projecting, to create a great quality of life. And on the other hand, if you have conditions where they're not performing well, it is a big inherent hindrance on the ability for those cities to grow and for them to be able to attract people that actually want to live within these cities. So we often look at cities in terms of a kit of parts, and that kit of parts being the planning framework, the natural resources, the public realm and transportation, the social components that fill into that, and then of course the buildings that occupy the different spaces. And when we start to think about urban solutions, those urban solutions are starting to shift in terms of the conversation. And it's becoming a conversation more about sustainable solutions as a top priority. And this is both a top priority for governments as well as for the private sectors that want to continue to grow and succeed within these urban environments. And I'll show you a couple examples in terms of cities that are putting this as a main mandate in terms of how to create successful outcomes to urban solutions. Singapore is doing a lot in terms of interagency approaches to being able to create a high quality of life, yet a competitive economy, and do this bundled around a sustainable framework. In addition to this, they've created some key centers of excellence to look at urban solutions. And I think one of the interesting things coming up is their ability to look at underground space and the way in which underground space can be better utilized within the urban environment. The City of Vancouver has a lot of programs related to healthy cities and the components around that, and how you then integrate all of the different development components of mobility, of land use densification, of seawater rise, which is a challenge in Vancouver, and do it in a way that then creates positive outcomes for the community. Melbourne is another example of a community that pushes sustainability as a forefront to most of the decisions that are made within the city. And then London. London's an interesting example of a city that has a carbon solution that really looks at the reduction of carbon. And they're doing it from partly the ability in terms of being able to reduce carbon, but also the ability to actually reduce energy demand, which is a savings to the government. And in trying to move towards a much more carbon neutral city was the idea in terms of how you manage the data around the carbon collection, how you actually monitor and track it. And that's something that the City of London has done in terms of moving from the central government holding all of that data to private sector, to helping to assist in the inventory and then the assessment as they go forward. So those are all cities that are looking at how they respond to this urbanization and dealing with issues of livability. The matrix on the chart here, or on the screen, shows cities as they rank in terms of livability, being the highest livability on the far right side, and then as you go further to the left it becomes less livable. And all of these cities are competing in terms of attracting people to come in terms of the livability of each one of these cities. Now, as you couple in density and urbanization, then you start to move to the upper right quadrant, and there's very few cities that have done this successfully. Now, the other side to this is, in terms of urban solutions, is the private sector. In the private sector, there are many companies that are now in the process of completely reinventing in the way in which they go to market and to look at integrated solutions. And to do this in a way that moves from selling things or objects to actually selling a whole integrated approach. You can see this with Microsoft, with GE, with Hitachi. They've all got these sustainable cities programs that they've put out. BMW is interesting because going from a car maker, now they've started to introduce BMW Ventures, which looks at the connections between where you're going in your community, what those are, and how you then connect and basically move through the urban environment in a more efficient and effective way. So when you start to integrate these public and private solutions, there really is a need for the partnership between both groups. And when we look at urban form is actually one of the biggest generators of greenhouse gases, but we often ask ourselves the question, what makes one plan more sustainable than another? What are the various components of those plans that can help to achieve sustainable targets? What can we do in terms of creating that roadmap for the future? And fundamental to that in terms of allowing key decision makers, when they are making decisions about how to move forward, is what's the cost and the payback period to any decision that they may make now. So the one thing that we've been working on, and this is definitely a private sector driven solution, working with many different public sector agencies from the Department of Defense in the United States to the Singapore government, which we've just recently worked with the Urban Renewal Authority in terms of implementing this as a planning tool, is a sustainable systems integrated model, which looks at the cost benefit of different solutions. It addresses various different components, and it wraps that all around the notion of a low carbon community. So when you look at the master planning of any community or city, you start to look at the building energy, water, ecosystem, transportation, and these are all different components of that, of which then through the framework system we can then optimize to a much more sustainable plan. This really goes through three kind of core areas. One is the assessment side of it, the baseline. The second is the recommendations that you make at both a master plan level, an infrastructure level, and then various parcel levels, which is your individual building parcel. And then the outcome is often policy guidelines or procedural documents that then get incorporated into either government or master developers. Now I'll just take you through a little bit of this in terms of what the tool will look at. And initially what we try to do is create overall targets to quantify performance. And this is where we'll look at what the total amount of carbon is in an inherent plan. We'll also look at what the total amount of water use is, and we can then set aspirational targets. Now sometimes those aspirational targets is a nationally mandated target, sometimes it's a city mandated target, or sometimes it's even the private sector coming forward in terms of being able to set a target that they want to achieve. From that we identify key performance indicators, and there's a lot of different ones that go into this. And this is something that varies according to city, geology, and geography. But the key to this is that it encompasses many different hard aspects of the community as well as some of the social software side in terms of community development. And it is important with each one of these indicators that we're trying to take very complex systems and make it so that people understand those complex systems and they get a glimpse into what the bigger picture is about decision making. Through the process, we'll look at the overall vision. We'll come up with options which we rank against a baseline. That will then develop a preferred option, which within that preferred option, then we can start to look at different packages that may optimize the performance of it. So with those planned alternatives, a lot of this comes back to the population again. What is the inherent residential, the office population, and then the visiting population? We can look at the land use prototypes. We'll use GIS database tools to look at the spatial analysis. That will be ranked with the key performance indicators, and then ultimately a matrix that assists in the decision of a preferred plan. Now I'll just take you through an example of this. Is a project that is a component of a larger city, and it's one area where this shows the overall population density breakdown in terms of each one of the different land parcels. So that's essentially a neighborhood in a city with a river that runs through it and a major boulevard. We will break down that population assessment into the various land use components and look at the total population per distribution of area. And then we start to analyze the spatial components. So this is all the access. How close are you accessible to transit? How close are you accessible to civic facilities, to schools, or to community facilities? And the reason why this is so important is that transportation is one of the major generators of carbon in terms of how you use your car, how you use public transit, how you get around your community. So it is a key in terms of both the traffic generation, but it's also a key in terms of the community foundation and the ability to access different things that you need on a daily basis, which then translates into the quality of life of those places. So when we look at the spatial analysis of it, we often look at the accessibility related to amenities. And this is something where we get into the detail of the index, which is a spatially distributed a matrix which ranks overlapping components to this at a higher value than if you just have access to one. So the image there shows you in the center there you have an index rating of 3, which is higher than the index rating of 1. We will then look at a methodology that then identifies, and this is an example related to open space and parks, so how accessible is park space in your community. We'll identify where that is in terms of the total amount of park space and the allocation per population. Then we'll look at how you actually get to each one of these different types of spaces. This then gets evaluated against the total service population, and then we go back to that initial KPI that we set in terms of trying to create accessibility for park in this instance, but it can be other measures. So that will then look at each one of the different park spaces in the plan, identify what it is, and we'll give a weighting to those parks. So some weightings, if a park is more meaningful in terms of size or program, it might have a higher ranking than another one. So there's an indexing that happens within the GIS analysis. That analysis then is done on assessment of the initial baseline, which then from the analysis we can come up with alternative urban design frameworks to deal with the proximity to those parks as well as the population per park. And then ultimately we can look at the accessibility to it in terms of the pedestrian network, both at a horizontal plane and a vertical plane, which we will then create different options based on that initial baseline and try to come up with a better distribution in terms of the community profile and the way in which the different spaces relate to each other. So you can see the green are different park spaces and then the accessibility to each one of those in terms of the park's scores. And then we can look at refinements to each one of those plans. So ultimately that comes then to the system outcomes, of which using that GIS analysis to look at the distribution of park space in the community, as the example, we can then look at the systems of which people go from space to space and the places that they're going to in terms of the quality of the design environment, so it's comfortable and it's convenient to get around. We can then apply this to services, so retail services, healthcare services. We can apply it to jobs, and equating the level of income of those jobs to the residential income of the neighborhood populations, to transit, and then ultimately to carbon. This will then be put into a matrix model where we can do a weighting for performance, and that criteria can be set either to be closest to a goal that we're trying to achieve or increasing from or decreasing from, which overall then looks at all the various components of a new planned community. And this is all imported through the GIS analysis, and then within each one of these different systems we can weight it based on each one of the on the options, of which then from each one of the options we create we can develop what we call is a completely balanced community. And we can look at how it varies from that initial baseline, which we can go back to then the cost-benefit analysis, and we can help the decision makers in terms of moving forward with the development of that community, really assess what the best value for the people who are going to live and work within those different neighborhoods is, and what are the measures and the packages that are needed to actually perform that. So we can look at energy systems, for example, that might be at a district scale. We can look at smart grid technology that might tie in, create better use of energy. We can look at water systems, which might be district water systems, or with ecological systems and how to enhance ecology within the variety of communities. From there, we can then optimize those programs and go back to that initial target and see how we perform with a preferred plan and what the cost benefit of each one of those is. The other component to this tool in terms of modeling then is at the parcel or the building scale. And at that scale, we can then look at strategies about sustainability within the individual building, which might be an energy model system. We can look at both on the waste side as well as the water side to create water balancing models. So these would be specific to individual parcels and to individual buildings. And then that ties in with a building information system, which is a BIM type tool that can analyze the different components and the performance of the building, which then ties back into the overall system. So, for example, if you're going to mandate a change to go to cold beam technology, as an example, you can see what the impact of that decision might be from a cost benefit as compared to district cooling. This then, as I mentioned, goes into implementation guidelines, policies, and procedures, which are then geared at various implementing agencies in terms of how to take either the master plan forward, the infrastructure support, a water system, for example, or for the individual building guidelines. So just to continue this in terms of the story, I think there's two areas that we see in terms of this design component and the ability to support it from the spatial information that's needed, because this is very data intense in terms of that access of data to help in terms of making clear decisions about what you would change or what you would do in the future. First one is really climate, and that climate influence in terms of things getting hotter in our community. Climatology in the urban realm is actually a definite deterrent in terms of some of those accessibility and actually allowing people to walk within their urban environments. So when we start to look and analyze climate within the urban environment, there's a lot of different things that we can start to do to help to make it more walkable and better to be outside, especially in a tropical, hot environment. And this helps to deal with public ground, ease to access to transportation, as well as just being able to walk around. We'll look at a lot of indicators in terms of wind speed, the thermal temperature, and what that overall effect is in the urban environment, which then can get into how we do CFD modeling for the overall community, and then also how we look at individual buildings. As an example, when you do a new building, especially in an urban environment, a tall tower that might be 50, 60 stories, you'll always do wind loading on that tower for structural loading. That wind loading can also be looked at in terms of the impact at the surface environment and what the potential decrease in temperature could be by appropriately designing the interface with the street. The second part that I think is an area that definitely is being developed a lot more in, I'd say, very developed countries, less so in developing countries, is the connection between the community structures of various cities. And this deals with connecting all of these different components of government, of healthcare, of learning. I think there was some mention of healthcare earlier, and then to be able to place those spatially within your neighborhood, so there's an identification between a use and a need for that activity and an individual themselves. This, of course, again, is very data intensive, and one of the key elements that we see is the increase of data centers and the ability to just be able to process the amount of data so that can be pushed out to an end user, and an end user can start to understand a little bit more about the impact that they're having on their own environment, as well as the performance of the spaces that they move through on a day-to-day basis.
2 more minutes.
Yeah. So with that, I think overall, the idea in terms of moving some of these global challenges, really the biggest things that we see is that population shift and definitely the way in which we respond to some of the climate changes within the urban environment. And there is a need for tools such as this, and there's a lot of other tools that interface then with the private or public sector in a way that really comes back to the individuals in their community and how we can create more successful places for people to live, work, and visit. With that, thank you very much for your time.